Sometimes people will ask me why I built an off-road Dodge Viper, and I never know how to answer this question. You might as well ask, why smile? Why laugh? Why experience joy? The more obvious question to me is, why hasn't anybody else built one? I know some people are going to point out that TV show from the 90s called Viper that had an off-road version of the car, but that wasn't really an off-road Viper. It was a TV show prop car powered by a V8. It is a real off-road Viper in the same way that the DeLorean from Back to the Future is a real time machine. Also, a lot of Vipers have gone off-road, usually the median. But this time it is on purpose, and this is the first time this car has been off-road. Hopefully it will not be the last, but we are going to push the limits and see what breaks. So join me as I off-road a Dodge Viper. This car has been running for a while now. I took it out on the street a few times, took it to a couple of car meets near me, got stopped by the police that one time, but it hasn't yet been off-road. There are a handful of things I still want to do to the car, like add exhaust covers on the side. I'm actually kind of liking this silver exhaust wrap, so I might do something that exposes that a little bit. I also need a rear bumper, something metal and minimal. I'd also love to throw 2 spare tires in the back eventually. At some point, I'd love to add an exterior roll hoop that also ties into a roof rack, possibly going down the A-pillar and becoming a partial exterior cage that can also carry a roof-mounted tent. But all of that comes later. Today, there are a few small things that need to happen to get the car ready for the dirt. The axle I bought is from a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. It comes with an electric locker. I just had to wire it up. For that, I 3D printed a switch panel that replaces the ashtray. I only need 1 switch, but I made room for 4 for future lights and things. The exhaust needed actual exhaust hangers instead of just stainless wire. I took the original ones from the Viper along with some plates I had laser cut at Send Cut Send. I welded a rod coming off the exhaust outlet and then welded the hanger in the right place. We did a quick and dirty alignment with strings, measuring the distance from the parallel strings on the side of the car to the front and back of each wheel. But before that, we had to fix a weird noise coming from the rear end. When the car had no load, like coasting on the freeway, there was a loud rattling coming from the rear end. I thought this might be the drive shaft, but we pulled the rear end cover to double check. Sure enough, it was coming from the drive shaft. The problem here is drive shaft angles. With a U-joint drive shaft like I have, you want the angles on the front and rear to be equal and opposite. This cancels out the natural variation in U-joint angular velocity, but the way I put the car together, the front joint is about 0 and the rear is over 10 degrees, which is bad. So we lengthen the lower trailing arms and shorten the uppers to adjust the angle of the rear relative to the drive shaft to get it about 5 degrees, which isn't great, but you know what? Nobody cares about this. Let's go off-road. We made the decision to tow the Viper to the desert, not because we didn't think it would make it, but because we weren't sure it would make it back. This is a shakedown run, and we are going to shake the shit out of it. Also, this way we had more than one off-road vehicle for this adventure. We had a Ford Raptor, and an off-road Viper, and another off-road vehicle. This car has a removable hardtop, which we were going to remove, but decided to leave it on, mostly because it was a hot day and the sun was beating down, but also because we never looked up how to remove the top. Probably something to do with these things. Today we're putting the Viper through 5 essential off-road tests: donuts, climbing, whoops, jumping, and racing. Now the Viper is not a very good all-around car. It's really good at 2 things: looking wild, which I kicked that up a notch, and doing donuts. So we'll start with the donuts. By the way, if you do donuts on a dry lake, do it at the edge where the surface is already broken up. Don't do it out in the flat middle. It's more fun out on the edges anyway. There was one small issue that cropped up when donutting, and that is the coolant temperature. It got pretty high. Not unexpected since it was almost 100 degrees outside, and because overheating is the Viper's natural state. This one has an upgraded radiator, but still I had to turn the air conditioner off, which was not great. But we'll call this good enough. I did not design this Viper to do rock crawling. It doesn't have 4-wheel drive. It's on all-season tires, but I do want to be able to do some climbing. I've done this hill in my 4Runner and a side-by-side. It's not the most difficult hill, but it is challenging. And like a lot of off-roading, it's hard to convey this exactly in a video. It's got a lot of big rocks mixed with a loose, sandy surface. It did very well at first, but near the top, the incline got steeper and the surface more slippery. I kept it going by keeping my foot in the throttle. The problem here is that I don't have a low-range gearbox, combined with the fact that the Viper engine has about 1 billion pound-feet of torque, so enough throttle to keep it from stalling just rips the back tires loose, chucking rocks at the cameraman and making a cloud of dust, which is actually the off-road Viper's greatest skill so far. I completely forgot to air down the tires, which would have helped, but it made it to the top anyway, and it made it down again. Another limitation of this car that became clear is that it has a terrible turning radius. I designed the uprights and steering arm attachments on this, and I don't actually remember how I got this ratio, but it needs to change. Fortunately, I made those parts bolt-on so I can remove them and replace them with something that will allow the wheels to turn more for a given steering wheel input. There should be plenty of clearance for the tires for this. In the meantime, I fixed it by just mashing down on the throttle. I did a couple more climbs on the hill, including one which was too slippery and steep for two-wheel drive. I backed down a bit to get another shot at it, but I got myself into a position where the front tires were just sliding and not actually turning. This was, again, fixed with the throttle, just spinning the back tires and sliding sideways, further supporting my theory that all of your off-road problems can be solved with an 8-liter V10. So, not a perfect climbing score, but definitely good enough. If you've ever been off-roading, especially through the desert, you've probably noticed that the trails are not particularly flat. Some dirt roads will have a washboard surface, but you get into the trails and the washboards become really big, and any good off-road vehicle needs to be able to hit them with some speed and not fall apart. So, I hit them with some speed. You can definitely see the Viper is not originally engineered for this environment. The suspension did great, but there were a lot of squeaks and rattles and the hood was flopping around like a pancake. It did eat up the bumps impressively well, better than my 4Runner, probably thanks to the long travel off-road shocks and the custom bump stops. There was one small issue. I noticed the steering was floating around on the sand, so I pulled over to check it out. And remember those steering arms I bolted on? Well, I should have welded them on because they were bending out of the way. They were not secured well enough, so my left tire was pointing slightly to the left and my right tire was pointing slightly to the right. Small issue, and you could definitely call this a failure, but I do need to redesign those steering arms anyway, so this is about the best thing that could fail. So, whoops, good enough. The smart thing to do here would be to put the car on the trailer and go home. The fun thing to do would be to go do some sweet jumps, and I am more fun than I am smart, so we did some jumps. I started out with some baby jumps to feel it out, waiting for the slam of the suspension bottoming out, but everything seemed fine, so we found some bigger jumps. These aren't really jumps, so much as just mounds of dirt near the edge of a lake bed, so the landing on all of them was pretty rough. But this was a good test of the suspension, just flopping down onto the flat ground. I did eventually find a nice jump that gave a sort of smooth landing, smooth enough to jump it about 15 times. I was really impressed with this car jumping. It landed smoothly, the damping was amazing in compression and rebound. Shout out to AccuTune for tuning these shocks for me. They did a pretty great job. Also super impressed with the Perry Parts printed bump stops. They got plenty of use. I also seem to have designed the front bumper to the exact perfect angle and height. Man, I'm good. There were a couple of minor failures during the jumps. Part of the window seal started to come loose and the passenger side door card fell partly off. Also, my switch panel started to banana and stopped being secured in place, probably too much heat, so I'll have to change the geometry and probably use a different material. We considered finding some bigger jumps, but since we had already found the bump stop bottom, and since the steering integrity was kind of questionable, we decided to call it. But all in all, good enough. There is only one way to wrap up an off-road day with a Viper, and that is with a drag race between off-road vehicles. The Viper is definitely traction limited in this race, basically all the way through third. The Raptor benefited from four-wheel drive, but this day, and this race, was all about the off-road Viper. Great day, all around. A few minor problems that can be fixed relatively easily. The Viper did everything pretty well, nothing exceptionally well, but really impressive for a car that was never even remotely designed to be in this environment. There are improvements that will be made, the steering, the switch panel, door card mounting, and also probably figuring out a way to add a cabin air filter. The Falcon Wild Peak tires did great. I love these tires, I just put them on my 4Runner. And the KMC wheels were such a good choice. I love the way they look on this car. Huge shout out to Send Cut Send. Go get some laser cut parts. Like 90% of the modifications on this car were done with laser cut parts from Send Cut Send. They are literally the cheat code to doing crazy stuff in your garage. I'll be out again with some more off-road Viper shenanigans, possibly Mojave Road, maybe a trip to Vegas, bigger jumps. Hit that subscribe button to follow along. And if you're wondering what kind of fuel mileage a Dodge Viper gets off-road, well, it gets 4.2 mpg. Subscribe. So I jacked up the car and checked the steering attachments when I got back, and they're pretty bad. Probably should not have jumped the car 40 times after we first bent these. 3 bolts was not the correct attachment strategy. Should be fixable. We'll make a new steering attachment with a better ratio and I'll full weld it on. Might put a doubler plate on this side. There's a big load into here, which I was not expecting. Starting to realize why all the aftermarket off-road companies just throw tons of steel at everything. Here's the other side. Also not great. Anyway, Viper will be out of commission for a little while. See you next time.